Everyone, welcome to Chapter 8. Today we will be talking about the art of printmaking. Now, what is the difference between printmaking and, say, a painting or a drawing? Well, the interesting thing about printmaking is that you're able to make multiple copies of the same artwork. Now, the visual arts, printmaking really describes a variety of techniques that is developed to create multiple copies of a single image. Now, a print, what we call a print, it is thus one of a series of nearly identical pieces, usually printed on paper, but not always. So prints are made from what we call a matrix. That is just the original artwork that you are able to print multiple copies from. And as you make copies, they're called editions. All right, so we'll be talking a little bit about the purpose of printmaking. So there are three main purposes of printmaking, but not always. But the three main ones are, it is first cheaper and more available to more people. And because of it is more available to more people and you can print multiple copies, then it leads us to the second purpose, which is for social causes. So think about flyers. If an artist wants to make, say, an image of Jesus preaching to his disciples and the congregation, and he wants to give it to the church to be distributed as gospel tract, well, it will be very difficult for him to draw the same thing over and over and over again to produce maybe hundreds or thousands of them. But if he uses the technique of printmaking, he's able to produce many copies by only simply drawing once. And lastly, a lot of the artists just simply enjoy the process of printmaking. So they just love printmaking and the technique and the process that is involved. And that's why they're using the technique of printmaking. Now, there are different types of printmaking, and today we'll be talking about all of them. There's relief print, intaglio print, lithography, and there's screen printing. And actually, concerning relief print, you guys might be more familiar with relief print than you think, because when you think about fingerprints, when you think about rubber stamps, when you think about your shoe print after you walk in mud or water, those are all actually a type of relief print. What a relief print is really just the artist carving away what they do not want to show on the paper and keeping the rest of the materials to be inked, eventually putting a paper on it, applying pressure, and that is how the image is transferred from, say, a piece of wood or a piece of rubber, then transferred to a piece of paper. So there are many different materials that you can use for relief print, but a lot of the artists use wood. And so this is a very good example of a woodcut print called the Prophet. And as here you can actually see a little bit of the wood grain that is embedded into this print. Okay, it shows the texture of the wood. And this actually differs very much from this woodcut print, which is very intricate and very detailed, called Shono Haku'u, which actually means light rain as Shono, by a Japanese artist. And now the Japanese are very famous for their woodcut prints because they're very intricate and they require careful registration. And what that means is just it requires very careful lining up. And the reason is because it involves many different color. Now, think of a stamp. When you're stamping something and using a stamp, you're usually using only one color. You can only achieve that particular image using one ink. Now, the Japanese really developed this technique of layering different blocks together to create a color print. So say for example, in this particular print, all the beige is actually one wood block, And all the yellow is one wood block, all the blue is one wood block, all the lighter blue is one wood block, and then eventually all the black is one wood block. So as many color as there is in the print is how many blocks of wood that you will need to run that paper through. So, and that is the reason why it is such an intricate art, and it require such careful registration to line everything up correctly. Now, the next technique we'll be talking about is intaglio. Now, intaglio is a very old way of printing. It is actually from an Italian word that means to cut into. And intaglio really is kind of the opposite of a relief print. A relief print, you're printing what is sticking out, right? Because the sticking out part is picking up the ink. Now, an intaglio print, you're printing something that the ink that is sitting into the groove. So usually, like this diagram shows, the artist will engrave or etch an image they want to print onto a copper, zinc, or a metal plate. And then they will rub ink onto the surface, and the ink will then sit inside of these grooves. And then they will be pressing a paper, usually a soaked paper, a wet paper from water, into the plate, and then the paper will then be applied pressure to pick up the ink from the plate. So that's why with intaglio, because such high pressure is put into it, that the surface usually feel somewhat embossed. And this is interesting fact for you that our paper money, $1, $5, $10, $20, $50, $100 bills are print in this way. A metal plate is prepared with the image on it, then it is sent through the press with paper that picks up the ink from the grooves. And that's why when you take out a piece of paper, especially a very fresh and crisp new dollar bill, if you feel on the surface, you can feel a little bit of the texture that is left behind by the printing. Okay, so here is an interesting video that I'm about to show you the process of printing bills. And actually, another interesting fact about money printing is that there are only two places in the entire country that we print money. And one is in our country's capital, Washington, D.C., but the other one is a lot closer to you guys than you think, is actually in Fort Worth, Texas.
We produce over 50% of the nation's currency here. There's only two places in the United States that produce United States paper currency. One is right here in Fort Worth, Texas, and the other one is in Washington, D.C. Our employees here go through an apprenticeship program that are plate printers and bookbinders and pressmen. And you know, when we talk about a family, this really is a family here. You know, there's generations of pressmen and printers that have been in the organization. You know, when people ask, what do you do? And someone says, I make money. You know, these guys really do make money. We produce a product here that's very unique, but it circulates worldwide. And how we play such a huge part of the economy in circulating currency worldwide. We still produce $2 bills. We love the fact that people like to keep them or, you know, give them as gifts, because then we get to produce more. The order this year from the Federal Reserve is 7.6 billion notes. The Fort Worth facility is producing about 4.6 of those billion notes.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys got the opportunity to hold $1.6 million per cashback. That was pretty awesome, right?
All right, so now the next technique we'll be talking about is what we call lithography. So, etching and engraving date from the 15th century, but lithography was really recently developed in the early 19th century. So it is relatively young art. So what lithography is, it is basically a surface printing, and it really is to play with the chemistry between oil and water. So the artist, instead of engraving or cutting away a material, the artist is able to draw directly onto the lithography stone, usually a limestone, a very smooth surface. And they will be drawing on it with a greasy crayon or a lithography pencil that is very oil based. And basically then the ink is then rubbed onto the surface, and the paper is pressed on top and is able to be lifting up the ink as they come up. So the good thing about lithography print is that it's very fast, and the images that you yield from lithography process is very hand drawn and very very drawing like. It's not like a print. So like this particular print you can see by Honoré Daumier, it looks like a drawing. You would not usually think that is actually a print, but because he uses the technique of lithography, he's able to print multiple copies of his drawing onto the limestone. So it has a very drawing quality to it, and it has a very hand-drawn feel to it, but at the same time, he could produce many, many copies. All right, and now we will be showing you the technique of screen printing. So screen printing really is just a way of stenciling. So right here, as you can see, they're going to be printing onto t-shirts. And most of your graphics tees that you buy in the stores, they're printed in this way. And what the artist does is that they actually use the screen as a stencil to push ink through the screen. So it is really a refinement of the technique of stencil printing. And what they do is they use a rubber edge tool, which you see right here. We call it a squeegee. And ink is then pushed through the fabric in the open areas of the stencil to make an image of the stencil on the material being printed. In this case is a t-shirt. So as you can see, once they print the image onto the t-shirt, then they will be transferring it to a heated press right here in the shop, and they will be pressing it to heat up the image and to fix the ink onto the fabric itself. All right, so this is all for us today for this particular chapter. And we will be talking about photography